VikesNow. I'm Dustin Baker, the August 16th edition. We are mere days away from preseason game number 2, which breaking news, the Vikings will probably lose, but they'll have like some good performances from Jordan Addison. It's like the O'Connell blueprint. There's certain dudes stand out and then they lose in the preseason, go win the NFC North later. We'll take it. But I am here with Josh Frey from Purple PTSD. He's going to break down some of the things to look for, the most important items against the Titans, these joint practices and this Saturday night. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, man. Got our first preseason action out of the way last weekend. Really starting to get our feet wet in this whole NFL thing again. So it's a good time. It's a good time over here.
You told me off air in the show before the show that you were starting to formulate your NFL standings predictions that you will presumably publish. What's one hot take in the NFL that you want to get out in the stratosphere before we jump into this Viking stuff?
One hot take. Jacksonville's going to be really good. I don't know if that's necessarily a hot take anymore after what happened last year, especially down the stretch. But right now I have them going 14-3 and being a top 2 seed in the AFC. So I think that's the team that I am waiting to see going into the season. AFC South looks rough. They're going to wallop everybody in that division. They got a few tough games here and there. Kansas City, it's going to be a tough game at the beginning of the year, but I think Jacksonville is going to run away with the South and be a top contender for a Super Bowl this year.
Yeah, them at 14-3. So them being good is not a hot take, but 14-3 certainly is a hot take. I will reveal my convoluted hot takes that I told you off air, and this is like extreme domino effect. I believe Brian Flores will transform the Vikings defense to prominence and get head coaching looks next year. I also believe the Patriots will struggle in a brutal division, which will prompt Bill Belichick to retire. That would mean Brian Flores will interview and probably get the Patriots job. And I think he'll bring Kirk Cousins along for the ride because Cousins will hit free agency. Meanwhile, Brandon Staley will be fired for the Los Angeles Chargers because they don't make the postseason. And then your 2024 defensive coordinator for the Vikings will be Brandon Staley because he and O'Connell are buddies from the Rams days. How's that for 4 hot takes?
That's a load of hot takes. That'd be one hell of an outcome. It'd be really interesting to see if Flores would take that job in New England, given his history there. Kirk Cousins going to New England, that'd be a pretty wild story for next offseason too. So hey, let's make it happen. Let's get some clicks for our websites, huh?
Amen. All right, what we want to do now is preseason game number 2 is at home, US Bank Stadium, Saturday evening. And now that we have a preseason game in the books, Jordan Addison did the thing, even though the catch was erroneously called illegal. Ivan Pace, surprise, surprise, can actually play in real NFL speed, quasi-real NFL speed. Luigi Villain looked like a killer, probably the game's MVP. I want to know, now that you know those things, we have these joint practices with the Titans for the next couple of days and the preseason game Saturday night. Start at the top or the bottom. I don't care. Give me the 5 most important things for these Vikings in this preseason game.
Number one, first and foremost, Tennessee's got a couple mobile quarterbacks on their roster and Malik Willis, Will Levis. Vikings didn't necessarily fare too well against those type of QBs last year under Ed Donatel. I want to see what type of what they can do against this type of quarterback during this upcoming week, during the joint practices in that preseason game. Because these guys, I think they're going to be coming to play. And Malik Willis he's been in the rumors in terms of Viking circles for forever now, it seems like. So I think he's going to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder coming into this week. Last week against the Seahawks, Holton Ahers basically won the game for Seattle in that preseason game. He had that huge huge run towards the end of the game, and then that weird touchdown pass to who was it? Jake Bobo at the end of the game to basically seal the deal. So yeah, I'm just looking to see what Brian Flores brings to the table in terms of how they defend these types of mobile quarterbacks and Malik Willis and Will Levis.
We're due for a defense or defensive coordinator to be good against mobile quarterbacks. Because even Zimmer in his heyday, one of his weak spots was letting Mitch Trubisky dance on 3rd and 8 and run for a first down. And then Donatel, too, and you've said this on the show for almost about a year now, that Donatel historically struggles against mobile quarterbacks. So damn it, the Vikings are due to either be status quo or good against these mobile quarterbacks. So we'll get a first glimpse of it with the Malik Willis especially. And yeah, that has twisted in the rumor mill now. The Vikings passed on Willis during the 2022 NFL draft, about 2 or 3 times.
Mhm.
And then this year after the Draft Network, the website, had an article about 3 teams that should trade for Malik Willis because the stock was so low, and it was the Rams, Seahawks, and your Minnesota Vikings. And then this week, Adam Patrick over at the Viking Age floated the theory that the Vikings will be scouting Malik Willis this weekend as a potential quarterback of the future. The only memory I have of Willis recently is how abysmal he was last year as a rookie. They wouldn't even let him play in a meaningless game. It was at week 17, and Josh Dobbs got the nod. So I don't know. Maybe Willis had a wonderful winter and spring and summer, and then it's not past crazy to trade for a prospect who was once promising for low draft capital and see what happens. Ross Blacklock and Jalen Reagor could tell you all about it. All right, number 2, after looking at the mobile quarterback situation.
Number 2, I think this is a really big opportunity for the Vikings cornerbacks this week. I'm really curious to see how they hold up. Joint practices, first of all, against guys like DeAndre Hopkins, Treylon Burks. Those two, that duo is going to be really good in Tennessee. I think Hopkins, his resume speaks for itself. 3-time All-Pro, 6 seasons of over 1,000 yards. Burks didn't have a terrific rookie season, but I don't think we can really hold it against him considering the other receiving talent that Tennessee had last year, plus their quarterback situation, like you alluded to, wasn't exactly the greatest between Tannehill, Willis, and Dobbs last year. But last week, even when Hopkins and Burks, they didn't play at all in that preseason game. But last week they had 7 passes that went for over 20 yards against the Bears. So I think the Bears and the Vikings are kind of on a similar standing in terms of their defense, at least from a national standpoint, where people are ranking them in terms of their defensive prowess. So I'm curious to see how these cornerbacks can hold up, because this is a really big opportunity. It's one of their first tests that they're truly going to have of many during this 2023 season. And can these young guys hold up and guard a guy like DeAndre Hopkins? Because they're going to need to a lot this season.
Did Hopkins and Burks play against the Bears?
No, they did not.
Okay.
They did not.
Okay, so we think perhaps they will this weekend, or it's a coin flip?
I'd be surprised, especially if Hopkins played. Maybe Burks gets on there for a few snaps, but
yeah,
I think for them specifically, it's going to be about the joint practices and matching up like Byron Murphy on him, Caleb Evans, Andrew Booth, all these guys that we've talked about all offseason. And are they going to be able to hold up?
Okay, yeah. So the big indicator here is even before the preseason game, how the Vikings ones or emerging 2 CB2s play against the cream of the crop for the Titans wide receiving core. What's number 3?
Number 3, I think Tennessee has got a pretty damn good defensive front in Jeffrey Simmons and Denise Audrey over there, the interior defensive line. We've talked about the guard play, the center play for the Vikings for 5 years now, basically ever since Bradbury got there, where it's been like, man, is this interior offensive line ever going to get better for the Vikings? And the questions continue to be there heading into this season. Blake Brandel switching over to guard apparently, and Bradbury's back. Ed Ingram didn't look great in that preseason opener last week, but maybe he can take a step forward. And last week against the Bears, again, Tennessee, they recorded, they had 7 tackles for loss. They got 2 sacks on the Bears QBs. This defensive front is going to be coming, and will the Vikings interior offensive line be able to hold up? It's going to be an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, Vrabel is not only, in my opinion, a top 5 NFL coach, but also probably a top 2 or 3 defensive brained NFL coach. And that's why when you're tabulating those NFL standings, even though it might be tempting to think, all right, well, Tannehill and Willis and Levis, what are they going to do at quarterback? It's kind of like Belichick, where I'm pretty sure Vrabel's going to squeeze at least 7 wins out of somebody because that's what he's shown thus far in his career. So yeah, the defense will be there, and it'll be fascinating to see how Jaren Hall ends up doing against some semblance of the second or third string Titans defense, or at joint practices. You're talking about how in real time the ones versus the ones. How high are you on the Titans in general? Do you have them pegged for like 9-8 or 8-9, or?
I have them struggling a little bit this year. I think I have them at 6-11 right now, but that's, again, it comes down to who's actually going to be playing quarterback. Is Derrick Henry still Derrick Henry that we know of from 3-4 years ago after going through injuries 2021 and not having the most efficient season in 2022? So I think there's going to be a bit of a down year in Tennessee, but I think overall this is a franchise that's kind of looking up after this season, especially if they can figure out that quarterback situation.
Yeah, and I want to say back right after the draft, some NFL hot takes by national media suggested that Tannehill could be a surprise cut, but I think that has kind of died down. He has a contract where, in theory, if they cut him today or they cut him on August 29th, they save like something like $20 million.
Okay.
It's not one of those Kirkish ones where it's like, oh God, we got to eat this down the road. If I recall correctly, in theory, they could cut Tannehill and it wouldn't be fiscally irresponsible. But I think most of that has died down. It might have been just an early offseason take. But you would think at some point that, especially if their season starts to teeter on irrelevance, that they got to see Levis or they got to look at Willis because, they spent some draft capital on those dudes. That was were we at number 4 or number 5?
We're at number 4 now.
All right, let's hear it.
It's funny that you bring up Jaren Hall needing to improve this week, because I think there's a few rookies that need to be able to step up this week. Jaren Hall being one of them. I wouldn't say his preseason opener was bad by any means, and I don't think we should knock or praise him essentially for what he did last week. It wasn't the greatest showing in the world, but I think he showed a few things. But I'd really like to see him kind of force the issue a little bit more, like push the ball downfield rather than just chucking the ball out of bounds when he sees pressure. So that's something that I'm looking for. And then Dwayne McBride at that running back spot, is he going to have another essentially dud of a game where he was averaging like 16 yards on his kick returns, wasn't making some great decisions on the special teams, and then only 2.5 yards per carry? It needs to be a little bit better than that. He needs to be able to bounce off some of these defenders and pick up a few extra yards after contact. And then Mekhi Blackmon at that cornerback spot, he had a few nice plays in there, but he gave up that touchdown, got pegged with pass interference on top of everything else against Seattle. So I'm hoping to see him take a little bit of a step forward. If not in this preseason game, maybe it happens during these joint practices.
What do you think the deal was with McBride in preseason game number 1? Because I was watching it, whether it was on offense or special teams, and I was like, this guy looks awful. Like, I didn't think he was slow, and he shouldn't be slow for a rookie. And maybe I was just jaded because Ty Chandler's so fast, but it seemed like he just looked like a fullback.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the vibe I got out of him when he was at UAB. Honestly, he's kind of just like he's a faster type of fullback kind of guy. He's just this burly dude that can bowl over some guys, but he wasn't necessarily the greatest guy at avoiding tackles. He didn't spin out of a ton of them during his time in college. And I think, honestly, he was just thrown for a loop because he got thrown all of a sudden onto the special teams after Nwangwu went out. So I wonder if that just kind of took him out of his groove a little bit, because I don't think he looked very comfortable there at all. And maybe that just translated over to the offense as well. So hopefully it's a little bit of a better week for him.
Yeah, and that's what these preseason games are for. I was just stunned because in preseason games, even like diet USFL league running backs can look the part. Yeah. Like, I'm so used to the Vikings throwing out Rock Thomas and he looks good. Mike Boone looks like the next big thing, or even Chandler last year looked like a stud. So it seemed like it was a rubber stamp for running backs to do the thing in the preseason. And McBride got a couple touches, and I was like, well, what in the hell is this?
But I think it also has to do, like, the O-line just didn't do very well last week. Yeah. Like, especially once we got down to those third string guys where McBride was getting a lot of those touches, it didn't feel like there was a lot of running lanes for him to actually do anything to begin with. So hopefully, like we talked about, that gets a little bit better this week too.
All right, sir. What's the final and one of the final most important items for Vikings Titans this week and the preseason game?
Honestly, I'm just very curious to see what Nwangwu's health situation is, because it feels like that's just kind of been thrown under the bus ever since he left that preseason game. Hopefully he's okay, because we saw last week when he was out, he's a crucial part of the Vikings kick return game that, over the past few seasons, and expected to be in 2023 as well. And then maybe he gets a few, if he's healthy enough to play, hopefully he can get a few touches on the offense as well, because we haven't really seen him be able to do that, even going back to college. We've talked about this so many times on the show too, but he's basically been just a special teams ace at whatever team he's been on, whether it's the Cyclones at Iowa State or so far with the Vikings. He hasn't gotten a ton of chances with the offense. So I'm curious to see, 1, is he healthy? 2, what can he do on an offense?
A couple things on him. So I hope he's healthy because he is, in my mind, guaranteed to change at least one Vikings game this year with a kick return touchdown. He did 2 his rookie year. He, to me, won the Patriots game last year. It was the jolt of momentum they needed. They couldn't turn the ball over off Belichick's offense, and usually if the Vikings didn't turn the ball over on defense, they lost. But Patriots were the one outlier last year for the Vikings, 13 wins. And then on Nwangu, if indeed he's hurt and we don't know what it is, that might explain why they're working out all these other dudes, whether it's Mike Davis or Kareem Hunt or that other guy I'd never even heard of yesterday. Who was he?
It was Ronald Ari, I think. What was his last? I don't even remember his last name, man. I wrote a piece on him last night, and I was the exact same thing. Like, who the heck is this guy? I went back, and he had a few decent seasons at UTEP, but
yeah,
again, he's a pretty typical undrafted free agent type of guy, just trying to find his way into the NFL.
And I'll tell the viewers, if Josh doesn't know who he is coming out of college, then he is about as unknown as it gets because Josh does the draft. And so I'm of the opinion, generally speaking, that they don't need another running back. I'm content. All of our memory right now is the preseason game when it was Chandler, then Abram, Smith, and Nwangu. But by the way, they have Alexander Mattison, who should get about at least 60% of RB1 touches. Then all you really have to worry about is Chandler to mop up. And then if he gets hurt, then you got McBride, who hopefully doesn't, look like Sean Mannion running the ball. But I just don't understand why they would explore Kareem Hunt and then Mike Davis, who is the ultimate RB4 on some depth chart. So that leads me to believe that there could be something more wrong with Nwangu, but I think time will only tell if it's a tweak or if he's, going to hit IR for the first 4 weeks.
All right, sir. I think
go ahead.
Ultimately it's just is Madison and Chandler going to be able to stay healthy? I think that's a big takeaway from this. And I think they're just kind of keeping a file on these free agent guys to maybe down the road, if they end up needing another running back, maybe they can bring one of them aboard for the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season or something. And hey, can you eat up a few touches for us? Help us get to the playoffs. So hopefully that's all it is. Hopefully Nwangu's all right. I'm assuming we'll probably find out more about his status from Kevin O'Connell at some point today, either before or after practice. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, and they say, I think especially Kevin O'Connell says that they do that. What you're talking about is to get the guy in the building, have a look, and then they just want to get to know the guy because, hey, it might be October 10th and, Madison blew out his knee and now we got to go look at Leonard Fournette or something like they need those options and they're not shy about revealing their intentions. All right, sir, next Wednesday at 11 a.m. when we record this, published YouTube about noon, you're going to have your 53-man roster prediction, because that will be you and I's final collective show until roster cutdowns. That's how close we are, less than 2 weeks now. So that's your homework, which I'm sure you already have written up, is get your 53-man roster. Yeah, so do I. Yeah, I was, for prediction's sake, I was dismayed because I put Colin Thompson as TE3, and then boom, this weekend Kevin O'Connell said that Johnny Munt's the best TE3 in the country, and I'm like, oh well, there goes my Colin Thompson prediction. So Munt better be on everybody's TE3 roster projection, because it'd be very weird for O'Connell to call a guy the best TE3 in the United States and then cut him 2 weeks later.
Yeah, that'd be crazy. Sorry about your Colin Thompson take.
Yeah. I should have waited. All right, man. We'll talk to you in 1 week with your 53-man roster projection. You have a wonderful week. All right.
You too, man. See you later.
Later.